So it's been a very strange October indeed. I hadn't talked to my son in a little over a day, who's in Hawaii. And unfortunately, he takes meds, 𝕯𝖒𝖕𝖘𝖙𝖊𝖗. There's been many attempts to try and get him off, wean him off. But finally, several years ago, I just decided to go homeless. I had just been making close to six figures, not months before. Made some bad choices that directly had to do with the seduction and this witchcraft around us that's based around opulence. You know, Emerson Drive, my kind of crazy shit. An entire ritual where these women are spoken to directly into their heads. And I don't just mean women. There are warlocks who supplicate to this 𝕯𝖒𝖕𝖕 or Mother Circe, Tiamat, however you want to view it. It's the same entity, whether or not it's an aspect or a symbol of the firewall that has to do with the very 5 digits when we look down at our hands. Many giants and I don't know what to call them, but anthropological digs have shown and manifested 6-digited hands, and these are just an aspect of the hearsay that have been, gobbled up and absconded with very quickly. There's been a lot of postulations about where these remains go, right? This sort of Smithsonian archived, boxed up archived information. It's a neat concept in movies, but it doesn't bring us anywhere, right? But when you really view reality as not a computational subset, like everything is following an ontology and that's just what it is, but an actual, and even working beyond the prism, right? The prism, right? Where you have light trapping as plasma in its so-called free state, absolute hot, entrapping, encircling with the perfect crystalline structure held at absolute zero, right? So you've got something unnatural occurring there. But this prismatic refraction, it wants to return back. The energy wants to return back to its original point of origin, right? And I mean, these are just merely quarks, right? They're like neutrinos, right? They're trying to transform and they can't, right? They're trying to geometrically transpose into another articulable form, grow wings, so to speak, but they just can't. So you see this samsara, this Ouroboros, and this black magic, Babylonian, Kabbalistic magic that everyone is supplicating to. Because they're looking at people advancing. The world has shrunk around us. It couldn't feel smaller than ever. The offices such as the presidency or concepts like the UN, they seem like little cereal box infomercials. You could literally put a 2-bit condensed trope on Trump on the back of a cereal box, and it pretty much surmises his entire makeup and being, right? We can amalgamate every concept and idea into not only just a phrase, but a sentence. This is bit information. This is transferable. This is codified, right? And then further, with all these UFOs, UAP, that don't really try, for the most part, most of them don't even try to pose themselves as anything else but drones, right? Why are they there? Why are they beaming down, spraying? I mean, there's all sorts of different proofs, video proofs given. But what I came to many, many years ago, a decade ago, and where I still stand, is that there's a topographical, almost like CD laser like recording, reading, that is recording a certain timestamp, a checkpoint, if you will, and taking all information in, all pertinent, viable information in. So where there is complex information that needs to be purged, it is left out of the system. It's not in play, right? And we're always reduced to thinking in this 2-bit way. Like you can't play a chess game unless you live in a temporal corporeal mind state where you're available and open to the conceptualization of becoming the movements on the chessboard while you're playing. And people who have more spiritual understanding will never sit at that chessboard with another person. Right? They'll never go through the limited pathos, rhetoric, and play of sitting there and playing something that's trying to isolate you into a 2-dimensional, 2-bit amalgamated piece of information. So my son, he hadn't gotten a hold of me, and I was asking him, how you doing? He's like, I didn't want to call you, Dad, because we went to this area. They're in Hawaii, and they went to an area. My son is, I think, hiking up toward a kind of a volcanic ridge, or going off into a certain area where he had pre-mapped it before he left in order to shoot a video for his channel. And sounds interesting. I sent him a list of well-known science fiction type authors from Hawaii, right? But what they ran into is they went into the weirdest, what my son describes as like, it was like they went into some sort of weird occult ritual. They were taken to an area where the LDS church, and I looked it up and I couldn't find anything yet. This is from their words. I was just listening to my son. They're all dressed in the same garb, wearing the same exact thing, and they all are dressed identically. And they were screaming out a certain name at them. My son couldn't remember. And they were taken to this big buffet, right? And they were pretty much like ignored by all these females, all these women, right? It was like they were swept into this occult ritual, is how he was describing it. And he was freaked out. He said the energy was terrible. And both my mother and my ex-wife, who not only sold me out, but sold their own children out. I watched the process occur. I watched the money that they accrued. I watched the payoffs. I watched every ritual they did against me and the things that they did to my kids. I watched it for years. I tried to do something about it, right? And it was as if they weren't innocent participants, like they were mesmerized or hypnotized. They willingly, both of them have talked about hearing a voice. I'm going to tell you straight up. I could see who they really were many years ago. I could see the corruption in both of them, and they both are completely corrupt people. They've gotten huge payouts, huge settlements, right? And that's how they are going to Hawaii. And I think they're actually using my son's money. My mother called me and said that I can't even get into how close to the hub with witchcraft they both are. Like my son started to exhibit a lot of his characteristics of schizoaffective disorder when my ex-wife brought in a practicing witch. She hung around with people who postured themselves as if they were Christian, but they were actually practicing witches, and put them through ceremonies. And I'm going to tell you, if you're not doing anything to combat it, and this world, you know, these women are doing this all around the world for prosperity, right? And it really does set the tone when you're looking at the westernized New Atlantis and there's nothing else there. It's like human beings can't just be human beings, right? They don't pay into a socialized type system where they're kind of removed from the materialism, quite possibly. And it really is about them as people advancing for the moniker, for the group, right? But then even that gets into some really precarious waters, right? So he told me they sat down to this huge buffet and they were basically pushing all this pork at both my mother and, I hate to even call her my mother because it's been many years since I've even really thought of or referred to her in such a way, but what else do I say? The witch. So her grandmother was quite possibly practicing, she was a practicing witch from what my uncle said before he passed away recently in Santeria. Okay, so my husband, her father, I was thinking my Mary's husband, my grandmother, who was extremely evil, like she literally looked like the Wicked Witch of the East, right? And was in fact in the movie industry, right? You watch these occult ceremonies and the childhoods that they go through and what they invariably end up supplicating themselves to. Like Mary, my grandmother, was so the person that I referenced was the grandmother of the mother of my of my grandfather, who passed away at, I think, a little younger, but right around the same age that my uncle did, of the same exact thing, right? They both looked very much alike as well. And they had very high IQs. They were both, my uncle was a lot less arrogant than my grandfather was. Like even in interviews, because he was a musician, would just sound extremely braggadocious and conceited, talking about his intelligence and his IQ and all this other shit. It was just crazy. So, like, there is something to this process. I don't know if you watched Mr. Mythos' most recent, which I found really odd, but I guess it goes along with like his Enochian angelic sort of breakdown on the language and the alphabet, you know, from years past. But, you know, to see him do such an expose on Crowley and the entire 28-day long, 1 month long ritual was a very bizarre but well needed segment to his channel, right? But it's a bit riveting to hear about that stuff. But when you look at the pockets of the rituals that are going on all around the world, and these people know what they're doing, and they're posing as if, you know, they're standing behind the, you know, like I'm looking up here and I see these two placards that my son's so proud of winning these awards, but it's for the L. Ron Hubbard, right? Scientology, Dianetics, Like, for people who think that there isn't an energy involved with everything through the whole process of you writing the book, why you wrote the book, an idea that you have comes to mind that is inciting, inviting, and creating you through geometric resonant unity, right? It wants you to change your form. That's really what, when I say supplication or capitulation, that's really what it is that you first look at a directional strand of information. You think you're going in a linear direction, right? And all of a sudden you change directions, or the direction is changed, and now you're going in another direction. And if you were to be able to articulate this and understand what right and left paradigms mean, just like thus spoke Zarathustra, right? When you look at the depictions, the distaff, and the direction that the Magi is pointed in on the front of the book, you'll see that the Magi is pointed to the right. If he's facing you, he is now faced to the right wing, right? So really what you're looking at is the right and left is forward and back, right? It still gets into this idea of a sort of cross, right? But if the Magi, the Zoroastrian Magi, is simply standing there in that context, then you have to then think like a lot of what Rosicrucian arcana, the sort of Templar-esque Freemason artwork depicts, right? Is that you're always drawn into this circumpunct conceptualization of, oh wow, now that I'm really thinking about this, this is drawing closer to me, like in the checkerboard, or something that appears as if you're walking into it, but you could easily, do this right left brain sort of visualization where you suddenly realize it could easily be walking down a hallway and away, right? So it's the same exact thing, and it's about supporting the spherical unit of one, or what would be considered the monad, right? So the idea of an inverted pentagram is to say, look, you don't have to go through that process. You want to enjoy yourself? So this is what the whole depiction of Mother Circe is all about. Church Kirk, right? Jordan Maxwell pointed this all out masterfully, and now it's being played out on the world stage, right? By the language, the LLM that we choose to express ourselves, right? Through a consensus through a collective, right? So what it gets into is the cremation of care. At that figurehead, at that sixth point that I point out in EPL, where ego, a healthy, balanced ego, is a representation of everything that you've done, the reason that you've done it, all the principles that you've adhered to. It won't allow you to do that. Do you see? And so people who become miserable and they cry out on the bathroom floor, but they're really these concrete infants, right? Concrete thinking infants that just want to experience and cathartically feel their way through the process, literally like the process church, right? They don't want to have to build up any individuality, any self-emanating creative thought, right? What the light of reason, ratio, degree, all mean the same thing, really is, right? And then what you find is as you're reaching out and you're reaching toward God, you see that the geometrical resonant unity is not good enough for you here. Not because you're some concrete infant and you're kicking and screaming and you've gotten everything you wanted, but the fact that you're looking at with very clear, clarified perspective that there's nothing here but sorrow and grief and death, and even worse, hell being this computational unit, this Mandelbrot set that just keeps returning you back. The vastness of space shrinks around you just like the world has shrunk around all of us, right? The circumpunct becomes this little dot, this little pixel, right? Or it's very analogous to what an atom might look like, where you have that little tiny bit of energy in the center of the circumpunct and all those electrons, right, circling about. And then you have an electromagnetic polarity inferred that seems to be affected by strong and weak nuclear forces that are holding everything together and compartmentalizing that might get into what gravity really is, right? Where we essentially have a vacuum or a gravity well placed within all of us. Even when you just look at saltatory conduction and the sodium and potassium pump, it's just odd how it works, right? So and then you look at the polarization with our hearts, circadian rhythm and so forth. You look at all the rhythms and the cycles around us, and it's the same fucking thing over and over again, right? It's 101 on the way up, 101 on the way down. But when you start to look at things from a diagonal sense, right, that we've talked about before, like the emerald tablets infer, there you look at the brothers black, what's referred to as the brothers black, and the angles or the angels, right, that they live in a diagonal perspective where they can garner and gain all information from all these routing systems that are just going vertical and horizontal, right? So we're living in this vertical horizontal space, much like the depiction of the distaff, the magi, and the wings that I described, where the magi points himself to the right and he stays fixed to the right, and the wing behind him, the left wing, is his past. He passed it. He no longer saw the left wing, so the left wing becomes a bridge to the past. So people who want to live in opulence, they want an ideation, an idea of themselves that completes a certain segment of time in revolution. They're afraid of negative, bad thoughts where they're out of control, yet they never were in control. The whole stage is an illusion, just like with Mother Circe, drawing in these members of the church, overfeeding them, love bombing them, and then turning them into swine to consume them. And that is the general sentiment that my son was talking about, is that this pork was being fed gratuitously to both my mother and my ex-wife. They were entered into the coven, into the coterie, willingly, right? They were spoken to, they were talked to. Things that seemed spontaneous, right? And they brought the witnesses along, my kids, right? And her brother, who I don't believe was there at that time, who created and was shown how to create dummy corporations to hide money. And I willingly signed off on money and property that I very much could have had, right? Because I knew I was going to go do it on my own, and I did. And then I was sabotaged. Even when you work your ass off, is my point. Even when you try to take the high road here, right? This ritualization is taking place as a matrix all around you, right? I've owned tons of cryptocurrency way before it hit, and was forced to make a choice of either selling it, right? We're talking like 2 billion Shiba Inu, almost going on an entire Bitcoin, almost 4 Ethereum, 4 to 6,000 Cardano. I mean, I really was studying this, following this, and heavily invested in this, right? And I only lost it over and over again. I had a shit ton of Dogecoin that I bought for nearly nothing. on Robinhood back in like 2017, right? When it cost almost nothing. Huge, extensive list, right? And I mean, you just watch the stories. When you're bound to this codified system, when you're bound to these monetary assets, you are tying yourself into that left-hand path that has to become the past. It's information that expired. It's not a working algorithm, right? And it's never going to support itself and stay alive. And so, in a sense, what's happening is these people who have these ideologies of a self-promotion and living in this sort of opulent state, but they don't represent, like, that's not what people want when they want purity. When you're really pushed to figuring out what is it that I want? Where do I come from? Where do I want to go back to? You're either going to know conclusively that you've been sabotaged and you have been misguided by the world, and that you came from a purer, better place, and you felt like everything has come against you to keep you from returning back to that, and that has been your life experience. Or you are what they consider like the errors as far as the gospel of truth that Jesus describes, right? Or more so, what's more recently being discussed, like the NPC players, right? These sort of ill-produced subsets of people who don't hearken back to recollect or have any feeling of purity within them, right? And it's very hard to see. It's very hard to say this, right? Gotta go. I've got my son calling from Hawaii.